Hungarian Folk Tales. How I passed my childhood. Now, when I was born and all of 6 weeks old, out I went into the street on a hot summer's day, and I met a true old friend of mine, who was a bottle ahead of me and tipsy with it. So we made a pair of oxen out of mud, a cart and sacks to load onto the cart to take them off to the mill and grind them. And off we went. Now, in those days there was a water mill to do the milling, but it wasn't there. The miller was strolling up and down on the water, and so we asked him to call up the mill, and he waved for it and shouted until up it came and we could start to mill away. Now, the miller man didn't have a scoop, so he pulled off my head and used that as a scoop. So when we were finished and off I went on my way home, who did I meet but a shower of women and young ones who started to laugh at me. "What are you laughing at?" says I. "Ah, you don't have a head," says they. And that's how I knew I'd left my head behind in the mill. Back I went, put the head onto my neck, and off for home again. But the women and the young ones were laughing at me again. "Now, what are you laughing at?" says I. "Isn't your nose at the back of your head?" says they. So I gave my head a good twist to set it right and off for home again. Now that's when I remembered that I'd stuck my whip into the ground behind the mill pond. Back I went, but when I got there, what did I see but that a great big tree had shot up from it and my old whip was up at the top. So up and up I climbed, and there at the top, what did I find but a hawk chasing a whole cloud of little birds, trying to catch them any way at all. Straight away the little birds, one and all, flew right up my sleeves, into my shirt, and right up my legs, into my breeches. Quick as a flash I tied up my sleeves and breeches, and wasn't I happy that I'd caught so many birds. Yes, indeed. And all these birds in my shirt and breeches started off chirping and tweeting, and all of them giving off in their own language, until up they flew with me and carried me off far, far away. I saw the women washing and scrubbing down on the edge of the sea. They looked up and shouted out, "Look at that big bird!" But I thought I heard them say, "Loosen your shirt!" So that's what I did, and out flew the birds and down I plopped into the sea. I made such a big splash that I emptied out all the water and the fishes were all left around me. So I gathered up a fine lot of them. I didn't waste any more time there because I was far from home. So I set off back through Hotland. Now, Hotland is a strange country indeed, where they don't build their houses on the ground, but up in the air at the height of a man. So they need ladders to get in. The people in Hotland are all big and tall, and everything is big. Even the church was so big that there were 4 soldiers in there on a horseback, and when the priest chanted, "The Lord be with you," one of the soldiers spurred his horse and off he went, and he intoned it to the second soldier to the third to the fourth, and he sang it to the respondent. So long was the Mass that the congregation could have done with a good breakfast, but that was no problem at all, since the altar was made of ham and the candles were sausages. And just as big and tall was the steeple of the church. When 2 carpenters were building it, they dropped their hatchets, and by the time one of them fell to the earth, it had rotted away. And when the second was in the air, a lark nested in it, and before it reached the ground, it had laid its eggs and raised its chicks. The bell was so large, the only way they could get it into the belfry was to carry it up when it was a baby and let it grow up there. It was hotter than hot there, so hot that all they did was slaughter a pig, put it in a pan and put the pan out of the window, and straight away they had roast pork. But I didn't waste too much time there either. I'd had enough and continued on my way home. That's how I got to Cold Land. It was so cold there that the white of an egg would freeze so brightly that you could read a newspaper by its light. You couldn't speak there unless you could read, because when a man said a word, it straight away froze in front of him and the other had to read it. But I didn't waste too much time in Cold Land. On I went, on my way home. By the end, I was getting so fed up with the journey that I stuck my whip into the earth and climbed up to the heavens. And there was my grandmother. "The best of the day to you, Grandma. Do you have some bread and jam for me?" "Oh, dear son," says she, "up here we don't really eat." "You don't? Then how do I get down from here quickly?" Then an old man arrived and I told him as well that I wanted to get back down because there was no bread and jam to be had here at all. The old man remembered that they had a chest of bran and we twisted a rope out of that. I could lower myself down. And as true as I'm here, we plaited it fine enough, but a mouse somehow got into it, and when I was lowering myself back down, that little mouse bit right through the rope, and I plopped down into the ground. I thought I was in the old town somewhere near the church, but I wasn't. I was at the edge of the new town, and I was well and truly drilled into the earth, so I shouted out for them to dig me out, but no one came. So I had to go home for a spade and dig myself out. And that's all I remember of my own younger days and how I passed them. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Man with the Heart of Stone. Once upon a time, in a distant land beyond the hills, there lived a poor old woman who had 3 handsome sons. One day the young men decided to set out in search of maidens from other lands to take as wives, for in their village they found not a single one to their liking. And as they rambled and rambled, their path took them through a vast forest, where they saw a small cottage and went inside. "Blessings of the Lord on you, old man," said the youths. "Would you give us lodging for the night?" "I will gladly give you lodging." So the young men stayed for the night, and in the morning the old man said, "Good men, your path has brought you to me, and when you return, it will bring you to my home again. I gave you shelter, and in return I ask that you bring me a beautiful maiden whom I can take to be my wife." The 3 young men thought, a young maiden for this old man? The greybeard can barely hobble along. But they kept these thoughts to themselves and tried to hide their laughter. The 3 youths travelled to distant lands as they had planned and entered into the service of the king. The king had 3 beautiful, strong daughters. The youths served so well and fought so bravely that the king grew fond of them. So he gave them his daughters to be their wives. With great joy, the youths brought their wives home, but on their way, they had to cross through the vast forest where the old man lived. When they came to his cottage, they greeted him. "Blessings of the Lord on you, old man. Blessings of the Lord on you. You were gone for a long time. I see you have found yourselves lovely wives. But where, pray tell, is my maiden to wed?" The young men said, "We did not bring you a maiden to wed." "You did not bring me a maiden to wed? Then I will turn you all to stone, and only one maiden will remain to be my wife." And as he spoke, the young man and the two girls turned to stone. One maiden remained, whom he kept by his side. She swept, cooked, and cried all day. One day the old man was in very high spirits. The maiden said to him, "Kind old man, why did you turn them to stone?" "Because my heart is made of stone too." "And where is your stone heart?" "It is there, between the bed sheets." The old man left the cottage and went wandering in the forest. The maiden picked dozens of flowers and wove a beautiful garland, which she placed on the bed. In the evening, when the old man returned, he began to laugh and cackle. "Why did you put that garland on the sheets?" "Because I wanted your stone heart to know joy, so I made a lovely garland." The old man laughed heartily. "I can see you are a kind-hearted girl. You thought my stone heart was in the bed sheets, did you not? Ah, but it is not." "Then tell me where it is, kind old man," the maiden pleaded. "Listen closely. In the middle of the vast forest, there is a huge rock, and in the rock there is a little bird, and my heart is in that little bird. If someone smashes the rock, catches the bird, and takes from it my heart, then I will have my heart again." The girl sank into thought. "Oh Lord, what man can do that?" Many years passed, and the poor old woman was still waiting for her 3 sons to return home. She thought surely they had died, and another son was born to her, and he grew up to a boy 12 years of age. "Dear mother," he said one day, "do I have neither brothers nor sisters?" With great sorrow in her voice, the old woman told him that he had had 3 brothers, and they had travelled to distant lands in search of maidens to marry, but they had never returned. "Well," he said, "prepare me for the trip, and I will set out to find them." The poor woman gave her youngest son food for the trip, and, weeping bitter tears, she bid him farewell. He set out on his way, and after he had travelled far, he sat down to eat and said, "Anyone who is hungry, come join me." Suddenly a ram with tremendous horns on its head came out from the forest. "You summoned me, young man. I am here." The young man treated the ram to a feast. And when they had eaten their fill, the ram said, "Take a hair of mine, and should you find yourself in danger, I will come to your aid." The young man continued on his way and eventually sat down to eat once more and said, "Is there anyone here? For I have a little food left." And a dove alighted on his shoulder. "Come and eat with me. Take a feather of mine, and should you find yourself in danger, I will come to your aid." The young man continued on his way, and he eventually found himself at the cottage where the stone-hearted man lived. So he knocked on the door, but the man wasn't at home, only his wife. "Good evening, and what brings you to this distant place, young man?" The young man replied, "I set out to see distant lands, and you? Do you live alone in this little cottage?" "I am not alone," replied the maiden. "An old man lives here too, but now he's wandering in the forest." And then the maiden spoke of her grief, of the men and the maidens turned to stone statues, and she also spoke of how the old man could get his heart back. The young man set out to find the great rock, and when he came upon it, he sighed, "If only that battering ram were here, he would smash this rock for me." And magically the ram appeared and butted the rock once, twice with his tremendous horns and smashed it to pieces. "Now all I need is the dove to catch the little bird," he sighed, and magically the dove alighted again on his shoulder, and there and then it caught the little bird. The youth took it in his hand and returned to the cottage, and as he approached, the old man said to the maiden, "Oh, my dear girl, I do not know what is happening to me, but I feel great warmth, and my chest seems to beat again." And as the youth drew close to the cottage, the old man began to shed tears. "Old man, I bring you back your heart." The old man put the heart of the little bird where his heart once had been, and it beat again as it had beaten before. Then the maiden spoke. Now, old man, bring those statues back to life. Let them know joy again. The old man brought them back to life. They paid him thanks, embraced one another, and set off homeward bound. They celebrated with a huge wedding feast, and they all lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Pork Pudding. Once upon a time, there lived a man who had a pig. The pig grew very big and fat, so the man decided to slaughter it for food. By the time spring came, the man and his family had eaten everything but the pork pudding. One day, the man went to tend his vines while his wife and 3 daughters stayed at home to cook supper. The wife told the eldest daughter, "Go up into the attic and fetch the pork pudding, my girl, and we'll cook it for your father's supper." The eldest girl did as she was told and was about to cut the pork pudding down when it spoke to her. "What do you want? You won't eat me, because I'll eat you first." And with these words, it ate the girl up. The wife could not imagine why her daughter had not come back down with the pork pudding. So she sent the second eldest daughter up to the attic to fetch it. But the fat pork pudding ate the second daughter up as well. So the wife sent the youngest girl up to fetch the pork pudding. But the youngest daughter did no better than her sisters, and the bulging pork pudding ate her up too. The wife could not imagine what had happened to her 3 darling daughters. "Well, I shall see for myself," she said, and went up into the roof. When she saw the size of the enormous pork pudding, she was pleased. But when she tried to cut the pork pudding down, it ate her up in a single mouthful. That evening, the man returned home from his vines to find no one at home to cook his supper. There was no supper on the stove and not even a fire inside it. The man searched high and low for his wife and 3 daughters. He realized that he would go hungry, so he went up to the attic to fetch the pork pudding to eat for his supper. But when the man got up into the attic and tried to cut the round pork pudding down, it shouted at him like it had at the others. "You won't eat me, I'll eat you first." And without any ado, the pork pudding ate the man up. By now, the heavy pork pudding was so weighty that the string could no longer hold it. It fell from the beam, rolled down the ladder, onto the porch, and out into the garden. The little house was on a big hill, so the gigantic pork pudding rolled all the way down the street. The local folks were just coming back from the fields, and the massive pork pudding ate them all up. The roly-poly pork pudding met a herd of pigs at the edge of the village, being led by a swineherd eating bacon with a pocket knife. The preposterously large pork pudding ate all the pigs up, and then the swineherd too. But the pocket knife was open, and the swineherd cut his way out of the pork pudding, and everybody followed him out into the sunshine. If that pork pudding had not split as it did, my story would have never ended.